Standard 5, Educator-Collegial Relationships. An educator should always maintain a professional relationship with colleagues inside and outside of the classroom. Standard 5 discusses the importance of educator-collegial relationships. The interactions with fellow educators helps one to grow in many ways in his or her profession. Therefore, educators should be intentional in developing healthy, meaningful relationships. There are several ways educators can establish these types of relationships, such as being a part of a professional learning community, departmental committees, co-chairing events, team teaching, collaborative lesson planning, and joining other education-related organizations. As an educator, seek ways to build professional relationships with your colleagues. 5. Unethical conduct includes, but is not limited to the following: revealing confidential health or personal information regarding colleagues unless disclosure serves lawful professional purposes or is required by law; harming others knowingly by making false statements about a colleague or the school system; interfering with a colleague's exercise of political, professional, or citizenship rights and responsibilities; discriminating against or coercing a colleague on the basis of race, religion, national origin, age, sex, disability, or family status; using coercive means or promise of special treatment in order to influence professional decisions of colleagues. Consider this scenario. Mrs. Smith and Mrs. Davis teach next door to each other and share the same students. In Mrs. Smith's class, the students are very loud and unruly and make very little efforts to follow classroom norms. Mrs. Davis experiences none of the behavior problems. The principal visits both of their rooms and informs Mrs. Smith that she should have better classroom management. She mentions how those same students behave well in Mrs. Davis's classroom. Feeling embarrassed and defeated, Mrs. Smith tells the principal and other teachers that Mrs. Davis is doing unethical things in her classroom, such as giving all students good grades, playing games all day instead of teaching, allowing the use of cell phones during class for non-academic purposes, and allowing students to skip their other classes to hang out in her room. The principal investigates the accusations Mrs. Smith made and found none of them to be true. Has Mrs. Smith made an ethical violation? Obviously, the answer in this situation is correct. Mrs. Smith did make an ethical violation when she accused Mrs. Davis of those things. Alcohol, drug, and tobacco use or possession. An educator should refrain from the use of alcohol and or tobacco during the course of professional practice and should never use illegal or unauthorized drugs. As an educator, you are responsible for the safety and welfare of all students. One must perform his or her job without being impaired or under the influence of illegal drugs or alcohol. It is mandatory that educators are not under the influence on school premises or while performing school-related activities. With reasonable suspicion of drugs or alcohol, a public employer may search a public employee's office, including the desk and file cabinet where the personal correspondence is stored. Therefore, if your actions and/or information received warrants a search or testing for drugs or alcohol, you are required to comply. Not only should educators not engage in the use of alcohol and/or tobacco while working and never use illegal or unauthorized drugs, but educators should also discuss with students the dangers of using these substances and ways to abstain from use. Be proactive in finding ways to prevent and deter substance abuse among students. 1. Ethical conduct includes, but is not limited to, the following: factually representing the dangers of alcohol, tobacco, and illegal drug use and abuse to students during the course of professional practice. Under Standard 6.2, unethical conduct includes, but is not limited to, the following: being under the influence of, possessing, using, or consuming illegal or unauthorized drugs, being on school premises or at a school-related activity involving students while documented as being under the influence of, possessing, or consuming alcoholic beverages, being on school premises or at a school-related activity involving students while documented using tobacco. A school-related activity includes but is not limited to any school-sponsored activity with students that is designed to enhance the school curriculum. A school field trip or a club field trip are examples. Mrs. Dunson desires to teach her students about the dangers of consuming alcohol and illegal drugs. Which of the following activities would be the least effective way to teach students about substance abuse? A. Students will complete an activity in which they learn the effects of various drugs on the brain. B. Students will discuss in groups how they should respond if being pressured by a peer to use drugs and alcohol. C. Students watch an R-rated movie that contains violence and shows drug abuse and its effect on a major city. D. Invite a health professional to class and discuss the dangers of substance abuse and ways to avoid. Or E. Students are introduced to 4 short stories, each involving use of an illicit drug. The student must use clues from the stories, witnesses, scenes, and doing laboratory experiments to develop a hypothesis and identify the drug in the story. The correct answer is C. It would be an ethical violation to show students an R-rated movie that contains violence and shows drug abuse. Standard 7 is about public funds and property. An educator shall not knowingly misappropriate, divert, or use funds, personnel, property, or equipment committed to his or her charge for personal gain or advantage. Educator misconduct is more than mismanaging relationships with students and colleagues. It also includes mismanagement of funds, property, and equipment. It violates the Educator Code of Ethical Conduct to misrepresent oneself in order to misappropriate school funds or property. These types of deceptive practices may be punishable by termination, fines, and/or jail time. When handling funds and equipment, be sure to know and follow all district, state, and federal policies related to appropriate management. Attend trainings and read related manuals that deal directly with this topic if this is one of your job functions. Ethical conduct includes, but is not limited to, the following: maximizing the positive effect of school funds through careful use of said funds, and modeling for students and colleagues the responsible use of public property. Seven point two, unethical conduct includes, but is not limited to, the following: knowingly misappropriating, diverting, or using funds, personnel, property, or equipment committed to one's charge for personal gain, failing to account for funds collected from students, parents, or any school-related function, submitting fraudulent requests for reimbursement of expenses or for pay, commingling public or school-related funds with personal funds or checking accounts, or using school property without the approval of the local board of education or governing body. For this scenario, Ms. Jacobs is the literacy coach for a rural school district. She works with teachers in all of the different schools, some of which are very far out in the county. At the end of each month, she completes a mileage report and is reimbursed for travel. Ms. Jacob actually travels about 550 miles per month for work. However, she claims 850 miles on her monthly mileage report. Which of these 4 describe the component of unethical conduct for Standard 7 that Mrs. Jacobs is engaged in? The correct answer is B, submitting fraudulent requests for reimbursement of expenses or for pay. Mrs. Jacobs travels 550 miles, yet she asks for reimbursement for 850 miles. This is clearly an ethical violation. Parts of the MDE training. Think about standards 5 through 7 and how you might address those ethical issues related to professional conduct in your practice. Review the next recording on the remaining standards, then go to Canvas and complete the MDE ethics quiz. You must retake the quiz until you get 80% correct or higher. And remember, you have 3 attempts to meet this criteria.